Hello there, my dear grandchild. Come closer now. Snuggle in and let Lola tell you a story.
In the quiet hills of Bethlehem, there lived a young boy named David. He was the youngest of 8 brothers. While his older brothers worked the fields or served in the army, David watched over the family's sheep. Each morning he led them to grassy hills, and each evening he brought them home safely. He played his harp, sang songs to God, and talked to the sheep like friends. Though he was small and often forgotten, David's heart was full of love and courage. Long before David was born, there was a prophet named Samuel. When Samuel was just a boy, he lived in the temple and listened closely to God's voice. He grew up to be wise and kind, a leader and a teacher for the people of Israel. God would speak to Samuel, and Samuel would share God's words with the people. Now, in his older years, Samuel was given a special mission. Far away, Israel had a king named Saul. At first, Saul listened to God, but over time his heart grew proud. He made choices that went against God's commands. He built statues for himself, and he rushed ahead without waiting for God's word. The people still saw Saul as king, but God had turned away from him. So God spoke to his prophet Samuel, "Go to Bethlehem, find a man named Jesse. One of his sons will be the next king." Samuel was afraid. What if Saul finds out? But God told him to take a sacrifice and say he came to worship. So Samuel obeyed and went to Bethlehem. Jesse was a farmer and shepherd in Bethlehem. He had 8 sons and worked hard to care for his family. His home was busy, fields to tend, animals to feed, and children growing tall and strong. The older sons were known in the town. They helped with the land, protected the flocks, and served in King Saul's army. One by one, Jesse called his sons to step forward. First came Eliab. He stood tall, with strong shoulders and a serious face. Samuel thought to himself, "This must be the one. He looks like a king." But God whispered, "Do not consider how tall or strong he is. I have not chosen him. I look at the heart." Then came Abinadab. He was quick and confident. Samuel waited, but again God said no. Next came Shammah. He walked with pride, sure of himself. Still, the Lord said, "Not this one either." 4 more sons passed before Samuel, each with hopeful eyes, and with each one, the answer was the same: no. Samuel looked around and slowly turned to Jesse. "Are these all your sons?" Jesse said, "Well, there is one more, the youngest, He's out with the sheep. They sent for David. He came in, dusty and sun-kissed from the fields. He was young and smelled like sheep, but when Samuel saw him, God said, "This is the one. Anoint him." So Samuel took the oil and gently poured it on David's head. The oil ran down his hair, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. David didn't understand everything, but he felt something new in his heart. God had chosen him. As David turned back to care for the sheep, Samuel quietly watched him go. He thought to himself, "He is young, but God sees more than we do." The oil on Samuel's hands glistened in the sunlight. He didn't know when or how David would become king, but he knew this: God had chosen well. After that day, David didn't become king right away. He went back to the hills to care for the sheep and play his harp. But everything had changed. He was still a shepherd boy, but now he carried a promise. God had seen his heart, and God had a plan. David looked out over the hills, the wind brushing gently through the grass. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I don't know what comes next, but I trust you, Lord." Somewhere in the distance, a lamb bleated. David smiled and picked up his harp once more.
It's a story of a little boy and a very big giant. But first, let me tell you about a special place, a land called Israel. Israel was filled with green hills, tall olive trees, and golden fields that danced with the wind. But Israel wasn't just beautiful. It was chosen, a land promised by God to his people. The people of Israel loved God, and God loved them deeply. He gave them rules to live by, and he watched over them like a shepherd watches his sheep. But even in a land so blessed, there were times of trouble. Other nations, like the Philistines, wanted to take Israel for themselves. They didn't believe in the one true God. They built statues of their own gods, and they wanted to rule over everyone else. And so there were battles. Israel needed someone to lead them, someone who trusted God with all their heart. Now, in a quiet little town, there lived a young shepherd boy named David. David wasn't like his older brothers. They were big and strong, soldiers in the army. But David, he spent his days in the hills, watching over his father's sheep. All alone with the animals, David would play his harp, singing soft songs to God. Sometimes he would even talk to the sheep, telling them stories just like this one. David wasn't just gentle, he was brave. One time, a big, roaring lion came out of the woods. It grabbed one of his sheep in its huge jaws. But David didn't run. No, he ran toward the lion. With nothing but a sling and a stick, he chased it down and saved the sheep. Another time, a hungry bear tried to attack, but David fought it off too. And each time, he knew one thing for sure: God saved me. That's why David loved God with all his heart. He trusted him, even when he was all alone, even when things were scary. Now, at this time, the people of Israel had an enemy, a strong, mean group called the Philistines. The Philistines didn't love God. They worshiped their own idols. And they wanted to take over Israel's land. So they sent their army to fight. And with them, they brought a giant. His name was Goliath. Goliath was taller than any man. He wore heavy bronze armor that clanked as he walked. His voice was deep and angry. And every day he stood on the battlefield and shouted, "Who will fight me? Come on, little Israelites. Send me your strongest warrior." He laughed, knowing no one dared to come forward. And so every day, Israel's army shook with fear. Even the king didn't know what to do. But then came David. He had been sent to the battlefield to bring food to his brothers. Just bread and cheese, nothing fancy. But when David heard Goliath yelling, he stopped. His eyes grew wide. "Who is this man yelling at God's people?" he asked. "Why is no one stopping him?" His brothers rolled their eyes. "You're just a shepherd," they said. "Go home." But David didn't leave. He couldn't ignore it. "I may be small," he said, "but God is bigger than any giant." So they brought David to the king. The king looked at him and said, "You're too small. You can't even hold a sword." But David smiled. "God helped me fight lions and bears. He'll help me now." The king sighed and gave him armor, but it was too heavy. Clunk, clunk. The helmet slid over David's eyes. "No, thank you," David chuckled. He took off the armor, picked up his sling, and chose 5 small stones from a nearby stream. And then he walked out to face the giant. Goliath roared when he saw David. "What is this? A little boy with a stick? Come here, and I will crush you." But David stood tall as he could, and shouted back, "You come with a sword, but I come in the name of the Lord God." Then, whoosh! David swung his sling, and bam! The stone flew through the air and hit Goliath right on the forehead. The giant wobbled, wobble, wobble, and then crash! Down he fell. The Philistines were shocked. They ran away in fear, and Israel's army shouted with joy. David didn't win because he was strong. He won because he had faith. Faith that God would protect him. Faith that even if he was small, he could do great things through God's power. So remember, my dear child, even if you feel small or scared, or not as strong as others. If you trust God, you can do big, big things, just like David. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and remember, you are braver than you think, because God is always with you. Long ago in the land of Israel, there lived a king named Saul. He was tall and strong, chosen by God to lead his people. In the beginning, Saul was a good king. He trusted the Lord and led the Israelites to many victories. The people cheered for him. He fought bravely against their enemies, like the fierce Ammonites and Philistines. When Saul followed God, he was filled with courage, and the whole nation felt safe under his rule. Saul brought unity to the 12 tribes of Israel. He protected them, and for a time he walked closely with the Lord. The people respected him, and God gave him strength. But over time, King Saul began to make choices that didn't please the Lord. He stopped listening to God's commands. He became proud, and he let anger and fear fill his heart. Because of this, God chose someone else to be the next king. But Saul didn't know who it was yet. The people noticed that Saul wasn't the same. He became restless, troubled, and often very sad. His servants worried about him. "Maybe music will help," one of them said. "Let's find someone who can play the harp to soothe the king." And that's how they found David. David was a young shepherd boy from Bethlehem. He spent his days watching over sheep, singing songs, and playing his harp. He loved God with all his heart. When Saul's men heard David play, they were amazed. His music was gentle and full of peace, so they brought him to the palace. Every time David played for King Saul, the king felt better. The sadness would lift and calm would return to his heart. "Who is this boy?" Saul asked. His servant replied, "This is David, son of Jesse." And from that day on, David stayed close to the king. As time passed, David became known throughout Israel, not just for his music, but for his bravery. He had faced the giant Goliath and won. Soon after the battle, David returned home from war. The streets were filled with people waving palm branches and cheering. Little children ran beside him, and the women sang joyfully. "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." The sound of celebration filled the air. David smiled humbly and waved, but in his heart he gave the glory to God. King Saul heard these songs. Instead of feeling proud of David, he felt something else: jealousy. He didn't like that the people praised David more than him. And slowly, Saul's heart began to grow bitter. One day, David sat in the palace, gently strumming his harp, just as he had done so many times before. The music drifted softly through the halls, soothing and sweet. But something dark stirred in the room. A troubled spirit had come over King Saul, filling his heart with jealousy and confusion. The peace that David's music brought could not quiet the storm within him. Clang, whoosh. Without warning, he hurled it straight at David. "I'll pin him to the wall," Saul shouted. David ducked just in time. The spear struck the stone behind him with a sharp crack. Before David could rise to his feet, whoosh, Saul threw a second spear. David didn't shout. He didn't fight back. He just ran, his heart pounding, but his trusting God unshaken. David knew he couldn't stay in the palace anymore. It was no longer safe, so he left. Even while he was on the run, David still trusted God. And though Saul tried again and again to catch him, David never tried to hurt the king. One night, David and his men crept into a dark cave to rest. But they were not alone. Further inside, hidden by shadows, was King Saul, sleeping soundly, unaware that David was only steps away. David's men could hardly believe it. "Now's your chance," one of them whispered. "God has given him into your hands." David stood still. His heart went thump, thump, thump. This was the man who had hunted him, hurt him, tried to kill him. With one strike, it could all be over. But David slowly shook his head. "No," he whispered back, "I will not harm the one the Lord has anointed." He crept forward. His fingers reached for his knife. Shh! Not to hurt, but to gently cut off a small corner of Saul's robe. Snip! The cave was silent, except for the drip of water on stone. Later, when Saul left the cave, David stepped out into the light. "My king, look! I had the chance to hurt you, but I didn't. I only cut your robe. I do not wish you harm." Saul looked down and saw the torn edge of his robe. In that quiet moment, he understood. David could have ended his life, but chose to spare it. His heart was pierced, not by a blade, but by mercy. "You are more righteous than I," he said, his voice shaking. "You have treated me well, though I tried to harm you." David could have chosen revenge, but he chose mercy. "I will not harm the one God chose," David whispered. "God will take care of it in his time." Saul's heart was heavy. He knew God was with David, but time passed, and Saul's jealousy returned. He chased David again, this time into the hills. David and his men found Saul's camp one night, where the king lay sleeping inside a circle of soldiers. David's friend Abishai whispered, "Let me strike him now. One blow is all it will take." But David said no. He is still the king chosen by God. Quietly, David crept into the camp. The soldiers were fast asleep, their swords resting beside them. In the very center lay King Saul, his spear stuck in the ground near his head, his water jug by his side. David's footsteps were soft as whispers. He moved carefully, heart steady, eyes watching. He reached for the king's spear and gently lifted it from the ground. Then he took the water jug with the same quiet care. With both in hand, David turned and slipped away into the shadows. When morning came, David stood on a nearby hill and called out, "My king, why do you chase me? Look, I have your spear and water jar. I could have hurt you, but I did not." Once again, Saul's heart softened. "I have sinned," he said. "Come back, my son David." But David did not return. He had learned that Saul's heart would not stay changed. David, on the other hand, kept trusting God's plan. He didn't rush or force his way forward. He simply waited. David had every reason to be angry, to fight back, to take the crown for himself, but he didn't. Instead, he chose to wait, to show mercy, to trust in God's timing. Even when it was hard, even when he was chased and alone, David kept his heart soft and his hands clean. And Saul, he had everything at first, a strong kingdom, brave soldiers, and the love of his people. But jealousy began to eat away at his heart. It made him afraid, angry, unkind. Jealousy didn't just hurt David, it also hurt Saul. That's why God teaches us not to compare, but to celebrate others with joy, because love and peace can't grow in a heart filled with envy. David trusted God, and in time, God's promise would come true. David's journey began with quiet mornings in Bethlehem, playing his harp and singing songs to God while watching over sheep. But everything changed the day he stepped forward with a sling and defeated a giant named Goliath. Since then, he's been growing, not just in strength and wisdom, but in his trust in the Lord. While David was growing stronger and King Saul's heart was growing colder, something beautiful was also blooming, an unexpected friendship between two young men from very different worlds. Now, have you ever had a friend so close they felt like family? Sometimes the bond between friends can be stronger than even the ties of blood. This is a story about that kind of friendship.
Jonathan was the son of King Saul, the prince of Israel. He had grown up in the palace, learning how to lead armies and speak with kings. He wore royal robes and trained with the best warriors. But even more than all that, Jonathan had something truly special: a kind heart that loved God and eyes that looked for goodness in others. Jonathan saw David for the first time the day David defeated Goliath. He watched David standing there, still holding the giant's sword. But what struck him most wasn't the victory. It was David's humble heart and quiet strength. Jonathan felt something stir deep inside. He saw in David a friend he could trust, someone who loved God just like he did. That very day, Jonathan made a sacred promise of friendship. He took off his royal robe and placed it gently on David's shoulders. Then he gave him his sword, his bow, even his belt. Jonathan was the prince, and by birth he was next in line to be king. But Jonathan saw something greater in David, and he chose to step back. He told David one day, "You will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you." It wasn't about power. It was about honoring God's plan. It was more than a gift. It was a covenant, a promise that said, "I am with you, no matter what." And from that day on, they were bound together by faith and loyalty. But not everyone was happy about their friendship. King Saul, Jonathan's own father, grew jealous of David. He didn't like that the people cheered for David more than for him. He didn't like that God was with David. And sadly, King Saul wanted to hurt him. One day, while David was playing the harp to soothe the king's troubled heart, Saul picked up a spear and hurled it at him. He missed, but David knew then he was no longer safe. Jonathan was heartbroken. He loved his father, but he also loved his friend. So he made a quiet promise to David. "No matter what happens, I will protect you. I'll find out what my father is planning, and I'll warn you." So Jonathan went back to the palace. He listened carefully and soon learned the truth. His father truly did want to harm David. When Jonathan tried to defend David, Saul burned with anger. He shouted, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know you have sided with the son of Jesse? As long as he lives, you will never be king." Jonathan's heart broke.
He knew then his father's jealousy had turned into hatred. David was hiding outside the city, unsure if it was safe to return. So before they met again, Jonathan came up with a secret plan. "If it's safe," he told David, "I'll shoot arrows close to where you're hiding. But if it's not safe, I'll shoot them far away. That's how you'll know what to do." Jonathan wasn't sure if he'd get the chance to speak with David face to face, so he made a secret plan, just in case someone was watching or the moment slipped away. The arrows would be their signal, a quiet message of warning sent from afar. A young boy came with Jonathan to collect the arrows. When the time came, Jonathan shot them far, far away. That was the signal. David saw it, and he knew. It wasn't safe to come back. Then, after the boy had gone, Jonathan met David in a quiet field. He whispered, "You must go far away. It isn't safe here anymore. But remember this, no matter where you go, I will always care for you. God is watching over us both." Tears filled their eyes. They hugged each other tightly. Two best friends, two hearts full of love, saying goodbye. Even though they had to go separate ways, their friendship stayed strong because it was rooted in loyalty, trust, and God's faithfulness. Long ago, after David defeated Goliath, he became a hero in Israel. The people sang his name in the streets. "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." King Saul heard these songs and felt jealous, very jealous. He became afraid that David might take his throne. So Saul chased him from city to city, mountain to mountain, cave to cave. David became a man on the run. But David wasn't alone. His family and many others who were poor or troubled followed him. They looked up to David as their leader, and David, he trusted God. They hid in dark caves, they drank from quiet streams, and they prayed a lot. Even in the wilderness, David wrote songs to God. "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer." One day, word came to David, the Philistines are attacking the town of Keilah. Keilah was a small farming town. The people had no army, only tools for harvest. The Philistines came to steal their grain and destroy their fields. David could have stayed hidden in the hills, safe from danger. But he asked God, "Should I help them?" And God said, "Yes." So David and his small army, just 400 men, gathered their swords and marched with courage. They faced the Philistine army head-on, a force nearly 1,000 strong. David's men were outnumbered, and many had never worn armor or fought in battle. They were farmers, shepherds, and refugees, not trained soldiers. But they trusted God, and with his help, they struck down the enemy, drove them out of the town, and rescued the people of Keilah. The townspeople cheered. For the first time in a long time, they felt safe. But when Saul heard David was there, he marched to Keilah to trap him. David prayed again, "Will the people of Keilah, whom I just helped, hand me over to Saul?" And God said, "Yes, they will." Though David had saved their town, the people were afraid of King Saul. They were ready to betray David to protect themselves. So David and his men slipped away before Saul arrived. As David wandered the wilderness, sad news reached him. The prophet Samuel had passed away. Samuel was the one who listened to God, who anointed David as king, and who guided Israel with wisdom and courage. All of Israel mourned him, and David quietly gave thanks for Samuel's life. Thank you, Lord, for a shepherd of truth. Sometime after, David and his men were camping near the land of a wealthy man named Nabal. David's men had been kind to Nabal's shepherds, protecting them, sharing the pasture. So David sent a gentle request. "May we share some food from your feast?" he asked nicely. But Nabal was rude and mean. "Who is this, David? I owe him nothing," he shouted. David felt insulted, angry. He told his men, "Put on your swords." He was ready to fight, but Nabal's wife, Abigail, was wise and kind. She quickly packed food, bread, raisin cakes, roasted lamb, and rode out to meet David. When she saw him, she bowed low and said, "Please forgive my husband. I bring peace. Don't let anger lead you into regret." David listened. He put down his anger and said, "Praise God for sending you. You have saved me from doing something wrong." Later, when Nabal heard what happened, his heart failed him, and he died. David was moved by Abigail's courage, and soon she became his wife. One night, while resting in a cave, David came very close to Saul, but he chose mercy instead of revenge. You can hear more about this moment in our story, David and King Saul. Years passed. David still lived in the wilderness, trusting God. He had chances to fight Saul, but he never did. He waited patiently for God's time, even when it was hard, even when it was lonely, even when it didn't make sense. David believed, "God is my refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." My dears, have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be told you would be king, but then have to wait many, many years for it to happen? It's a little like being told, one day you'll do something amazing, but you still have to keep going to school, doing your chores, and waiting patiently for that day to come. Picture a young shepherd boy, bare feet dusty from the hills, his hands smelling faintly of sheep's wool, and in his heart a quiet promise from God that one day, yes, one day, he would lead his people. That boy's name was David. And today, I'll tell you how God's promise came true. Through joy, through sorrow, and through the faithfulness of a humble heart. David's journey to the throne was not quick or easy. After the prophet Samuel anointed him, David served in King Saul's court, fought the giant Goliath, and became a mighty warrior. But King Saul grew jealous. David spent many years hiding in caves, moving from place to place, always choosing mercy over revenge. Even when he could have harmed Saul, David remembered, God will choose the time, not me. Children, that's a hard thing to do, waiting for God's perfect moment. Then one day, news arrived from the battlefield. The Philistines had attacked Mount Gilboa. King Saul fought bravely, but the enemy was strong. Jonathan, David's closest friend, the one who had protected and encouraged him, was also there. Side by side with their soldiers, they faced the fight. It was a fierce and dangerous battle. Jonathan was struck down, and when Saul realized the battle was lost and he was badly wounded, he chose to fall on his own sword, so he would not be captured by the enemy. They died with glory and honor, giving their lives for Israel. When David heard the news, his heart felt like it was breaking. He tore his clothes in sorrow. He wept, not only for his friend Jonathan, but for Saul as well. Even though Saul had chased him for years, David still honored him as the king God had chosen. David wrote a song of mourning, calling Saul and Jonathan mighty warriors, and remembering Jonathan's love as deeper than that of a brother. Children, this shows us something important. God's love can help us forgive, and even in sorrow, we can choose to honor others. But even after Saul's death, not everyone in Israel followed David right away. Saul still had one son left. His name was Ishbosheth. With the help of Abner, the commander of Saul's army, Ishbosheth became king over the northern tribes. David ruled only the tribe of Judah from the city of Hebron. For a time, the nation was divided. There were small battles between David's men and Ishbosheth's men. Not constant war, but enough to keep the two kingdoms apart. Still, David did not rush to take the throne. He trusted God to bring the people together in his time. As the years passed, David's side grew stronger because he ruled wisely and fairly. People began to see that God's hand was with him. One day, Ishbosheth accused Abner of wrongdoing. Feeling deeply offended, Abner decided to help unite the kingdom under David. He promised to speak with the elders of the tribes so they would follow David instead. Before Abner could finish his mission, he was killed by one of David's commanders, something David did not order and did not approve of. David even mourned Abner, showing once again that he valued peace over revenge. Without Abner's leadership, Ishbosheth lost much of his support. 2 of his own men later killed him while he was resting. But when they brought the news to David, expecting a reward, David punished them instead. David knew the throne should never come by treachery. It must come by God's will. At last the elders of all Israel gathered in Hebron. They said, "David, God chose you long ago. You cared for us as a shepherd cares for his sheep. Be our king, and we will follow you." David prayed, asking God for wisdom. And when he accepted, it was with a humble heart and a promise. "I will lead you with care and with love." The day David was crowned, music filled the air. Trumpets sounded, tambourines jingled, children danced in the streets. But David remembered the quiet hills of Bethlehem. He knew a king's job was not to sit on a throne and feel important. It was to protect his people, guide them toward God, and serve them with humility. Instead of thinking, "I am powerful now," David thought, "I am responsible now." Under David's rule, the people began to feel safe again. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, placing God's presence at the very center of the nation. When David sang and played his harp, the songs were not about himself, but about the goodness of God. And God blessed David, because David's heart always looked up toward him. My dear ones, David's story teaches us three beautiful truths. 1. God's promises always come true, though sometimes we must wait. 2. Even in sorrow, we can choose to forgive and honor others. 3. True leadership is about serving, not being served. You may not wear a crown, but you can still be a leader by showing kindness, speaking truth, and loving like Jesus. Well, my dear ones, I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you'd like to hear more Bible stories like this, told straight from my heart, be sure to click subscribe so you can join me next time. I'll have the kettle on, and we'll share another story together soon. My dears, have you ever had something so special, so precious, that you held it close and never wanted to let it go? Maybe it was your favorite toy or a soft blanket that made you feel safe at night. Now, imagine a golden chest shining like sunlight with angels carved on top. A chest so holy that it reminded the people of Israel that God Himself was with them. That chest was called the Ark of God. And oh, what a story it has to tell. Long before David's time, God told Moses to build a very special chest. It was made of strong acacia wood, covered all over in shining gold. On top were two golden angels, their wings stretching out like they were guarding something precious. This chest was called the Ark of the Covenant. It was built with care and beauty because it would remind the people of God's holy presence. Wherever God's people traveled, in deserts, valleys, or mountains, the ark was a sign that God was with them, watching over them, guiding their steps. Inside the ark were 3 treasures, each with a story to tell. The stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, showing God's law and His ways. A jar of manna, the bread God gave in the desert, to remind them He always provides. And Aaron's staff, a sign that God had chosen leaders for His people. So, whenever the people saw the ark, they remembered God teaches us, God feeds us, God leads us. The ark wasn't just a box of treasures, it was a promise that God would never leave His children. For many years, the ark stayed outside the city. But when David became king, his heart longed to bring the ark into Jerusalem, the very center of God's people. He wanted everyone to remember how wonderful and holy the Lord was. So David gathered 30,000 men, along with musicians and singers, and they set out to bring the ark home. The ark was placed on a brand new cart pulled by oxen. Harps and lyres strummed, tambourines jingled, cymbals clashed, and David and the people danced and sang with all their might. But then the oxen stumbled, the cart shook, and a man named Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. In that instant, he fell down. He had touched what was holy, something God had said no one should handle in that way. David stopped, stunned. The music grew quiet. His heart felt heavy. He realized they had celebrated with joy, but not with obedience. They had not carried the ark the way God commanded. Children, sometimes we get so excited about doing something for God that we forget to do it God's way, and that can bring sadness. Unsure what to do, David placed the ark in the home of a man named Obed-Edom. He wasn't a king, not even a soldier, just a man with a simple house and a willing heart. And there, something beautiful happened. For 3 months the ark rested in Obed-Edom's home, and the Lord blessed his family. His crops grew, his children thrived. Peace filled every corner of their house. It was as if God's smile rested right over their roof. At last, David tried again, but this time he listened carefully to God's instructions. The priests carried the ark on their shoulders with special poles, just as the Lord had said. After 6 steps, David stopped and gave an offering to God. 6 more steps, another offering. Slowly, carefully, joyfully, they honored God with every footstep. David set aside his royal robe and dressed in simple cloth like a servant. Then he danced before the Lord with all his heart, not to impress the people, but to show his love for God. Trumpets sounded, voices sang, and the whole city came alive with praise. Not everyone was pleased. Michal, David's wife, watched from her window. She thought David looked foolish. But David said, "I am not dancing for people. I am dancing for the Lord." At last, the ark of God entered Jerusalem. David placed it in a special tent, prepared gifts of bread and sweet treats for everyone.
Thank you.
And the city celebrated together. This time, God was pleased because his people had learned to worship with both joy and respect. And the ark shining in the middle of Jerusalem reminded them all, God is with us. So, my dear ones, David's story teaches us something precious. 1, God's presence is holy, so we must honor him with care. 2, worship is not about looking fancy. It's about loving God with all our hearts. 3, and when we do things God's way, his blessings fill our lives.
My dear little ones, have you ever made a choice that you later wished you hadn't? Maybe you told a little fib, or kept a cookie after Mama said, "Just one." Well, even grown-ups, even kings, sometimes make mistakes. Tonight I'll tell you about a king who once made a very wrong choice, but also about how God's love and forgiveness can reach us, even in our darkest moments. Imagine a cool evening on a palace rooftop, the stars twinkling above Jerusalem, the city quiet and still. That's where our story begins. Long ago, there was a shepherd boy named David. Do you remember him?
He trusted God to fight the giant Goliath with only a sling and a stone. And because of his courage and his faith, God made David king of Israel. But one year, while David's soldiers were far away in battle, David stayed home in his palace. One night he walked across the rooftop, breathing in the evening air, and there, high above the city, he saw a woman named Bathsheba. She was very beautiful, with kind eyes and gentle ways. David asked his servant, "Who is she?" The servant replied, "That is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of your bravest soldiers." Now, boys and girls, when David heard she was another man's wife, he should have looked away. But instead, David's heart wandered. He made a choice that was not right.
Before we go on, let me tell you a little about Uriah. He wasn't just any soldier. Uriah was one of David's mighty men, the strongest, bravest warriors in all of Israel. These were men who fought fiercely to protect their people and stayed loyal to their king. Uriah was known for his courage and his honor. He loved Bathsheba dearly and served Israel with all his heart. He was the kind of man others could trust, faithful to his wife, faithful to his friends, and faithful to God. But when Bathsheba discovered she was going to have a baby and told David, David grew worried. He didn't want anyone to know what he had done, so David tried to cover it up. He called Uriah home from the battlefield, hoping he would go home to his wife. But Uriah said, "How could I relax when my fellow soldiers are still on the field?" Children, do you see the difference? Uriah's heart was full of loyalty and truth, while David's was tangled with secrets. When Uriah would not go home, David made a terrible plan. He wrote a letter to the commander of the army. In it, he said, "Put Uriah at the very front of the battle, and then pull back." David gave the letter to Uriah himself. Without knowing what it said, Uriah carried the very message that would lead to his death. And so, in battle, Uriah was struck down. Bathsheba wept, her heart heavy with sorrow. After her mourning, David brought her into the palace and married her. But, my little ones, nothing is hidden from God. He saw everything, David's actions, Bathsheba's tears, Uriah's faithfulness, and God was deeply saddened. In his love, God sent the prophet Nathan to speak to David. But Nathan didn't scold right away. Instead, he told a story. There was once a rich man with many sheep and cattle, and there was a poor man who had only one little lamb. He loved that lamb dearly. It ate from his plate and even slept in his arms. One day, the rich man had a visitor, but instead of using one of his many animals, he took the poor man's lamb and cooked it for his guest. When David heard this, he grew angry. "That man deserves to be punished!" he shouted. Then Nathan looked straight into David's eyes and said softly, "You are that man." Suddenly, David understood. His heart sank. He had sinned greatly against God. Nathan told David that though God forgave him, there would still be consequences for his choices. Trouble would rise within his own family, and the baby born to Bathsheba would not survive. David fell to his knees. He prayed and wept. "Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me." His heart was broken, yet he clung to God's mercy. And you know what, children? Even though David's choices brought sorrow, God never stopped loving him. Later, God blessed David and Bathsheba with another son, a boy named Solomon, who grew wise and became the next king of Israel.
So, what can we learn from David and Bathsheba's story? We learn that wrong choices have consequences. Sin doesn't just hurt us, it hurts others too. But we also learn something even greater. God's mercy is bigger than our mistakes. When we say, "I'm sorry," and truly turn back to Him, God forgives. Just as He forgave David, He forgives us, because His love never gives up.
My dear ones, have you ever wondered what happens when families fight? Sometimes brothers and sisters argue, or children feel upset with their parents. It can be confusing and sad, can't it? King David's family went through something like that. He loved his children so much. But one of his sons, Absalom, made choices that brought both pain and sorrow. As we listen to this story, imagine a family gathering around a warm dinner table with laughter, music, and the smells of bread and stew. Even in a king's house, where gold shines and servants hurry about, there can still be tears, brokenness, and lessons to learn.
David was once a young shepherd who trusted God with all his heart. He defeated a giant Goliath with just a sling and a stone. And one day he became the king of Israel. His journey, it was filled with courage, music, mistakes, and grace. Long after David wore the crown, he had many sons and daughters. One of them was Absalom, handsome, charming, and admired for his long, flowing hair. Wherever he went, people noticed. But even in a palace, not all is peaceful. David's eldest son, Amnon, hurt his half-sister Tamar. Sweet Tamar's heart was shattered, and she lived in sorrow in Absalom's home. King David, he was upset, yes, but he did nothing. No justice, no punishment. And so Absalom felt anger burn, deep, silent, relentless. He wanted justice for his sister, but all he heard was silence. So he waited 2 years. He smiled, he planned, he hid the storm inside. Then, at a feast with food, music, dancing, Absalom gave a quiet signal, just one, and Amnon's life came to an end. Afterward, Absalom fled, far away to a place called Geshur. He stayed there 3 long years. David, he missed his son terribly, but he did not call him home. Time passed, slowly, quietly. At last, with the help of Joab and a wise woman, David agreed Absalom could return to Jerusalem. But even then, when Absalom came back, David did not see him, not for 2 more years. No harsh words were spoken, no shouts, no arguments, no anger in the air, but also no hugs, no laughter, just silence. And sometimes, dear ones, silence can grow like a wall between people who love each other but do not know how to speak again. As time passed, Absalom's heart grew harder. He stood by the city gates,
where people brought their troubles. He greeted them with warmth, listened closely, and said, "If I were judge, I would give you justice." But his kindness carried a shadow. He was planting seeds, not of peace, but of rebellion. And slowly he stole the hearts of the people, until one day he felt strong enough, and Absalom declared himself king. David, broken-hearted, left Jerusalem, not out of fear, no, but because he would not let his beloved city fall to ruin in war. So he walked, barefoot, up the Mount of Olives, his head bowed low, whispering prayers as tears slipped down his cheeks. David was no longer the young shepherd with a sling. His hair was touched with gray, his steps slower, but his heart and mind still sharp, still filled with the wisdom of the Lord. So David made a plan, a quiet, careful one. He asked his loyal friend Hushai to return to Jerusalem to stay near Absalom, to pretend to serve him. But truly, Hushai was David's eyes, his ears, a spy in the enemy's camp. Absalom trusted Hushai. When he asked for counsel, Hushai answered wisely. But Absalom had another adviser, Ahithophel. His words, sharp, clever, dangerous. Ahithophel urged, "Attack David now while he's tired and weak." But Hushai counseled patience. "Wait," he said, "gather more men." Absalom chose to listen to Hushai, and because of that, David had time to escape, to prepare. Even in old age, his wisdom, guided by God, shielded his people. He knew every plan rests in God's hands. True victory only comes from the Lord. David was blessed with battle wits. He planned to draw Absalom's mighty army into the forest of Ephraim, a place of wild trees and tangled paths, where size meant less than strategy. He divided his smaller force into 3 groups, led by Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, his most trusted commanders. And so the armies met in the twisting woods of Ephraim, where even the forest seemed to fight. Horses stumbled, men became lost, confusion reigned beneath the trees. Absalom rode his mule through that chaos, his long hair flowing behind him. But suddenly, the very thing that made him admired betrayed him. His hair caught in the limbs of a great oak. The mule ran on, and Absalom was left hanging, helpless. Joab found him there. Though David had pleaded, "Spare my son," Joab did not listen. He believed the war would only end if Absalom was no more. So, beneath the tree, Absalom's life ended. When word came to David, he wept bitterly. He cried out, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son, Absalom! If only I had died instead of you!" Even though Absalom had rebelled and tried to take his throne, David's love for his son never faded. Children, this story is both sad and wise. It teaches us that anger can lead us down a dangerous path, and pride can close our hearts. But it also shows us the power of love. David never stopped loving Absalom, just as our Heavenly Father never stops loving us. God's love is stronger than mistakes, stronger than pride, stronger than anything that tries to keep us apart from Him.
And so, the story of David nears its end. He had lived a life full of music, battles, mistakes, and grace. From a young shepherd to a mighty king, David trusted God through joys and tears. He wasn't perfect, but he always came back to God with a humble heart. In his final years, David looked back with love, especially for the people he served and the God who never left his side. Though his story ends, his songs and lessons still live on. Let's bow our heads, my loves. Dear God, thank you for loving us even when we wander away. Help us to forgive when we are hurt and to let go of anger before it grows too big. Keep our hearts tender, humble, and full of love, just like yours. In Jesus' name, amen.